Great. Can I just quickly say thank you guys for being here on the third episode of our podcast on AI and decolonization. I'm looking very much forward to our talk today, particularly interested in work with, and particularly after having read your contribution to our blog, Michelle, and having discussed with you in our symposium. So very interested into listening to you and also to some of your students about how this works in practice.
Thanks for inviting us.
So do you want to start, Michelle, and just introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I am Michelle Stewart, Head of Digital Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I'm joined by my two master's students and senior tutors. First of all, there's Amu Sosibo, who's next to me here. He is a senior tutor, but he's also our lab manager. And Bhavna Pather she's a senior tutor and an MA student. And both of them are immersed in doing digital arts projects for their master's studies. Amu comes from animation and Bhavna looks at interactive new media art practice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that introduction. How did you start getting into this issue of digital decolonization and decolonization and digital media and art? What is sort of all of you, the origin stories you have in terms of how you got into this?
Okay, so from my side, it was more from a curriculum and teaching point of view. So I am traditionally a fine artist, but about 13 years ago, a small team of academics came together and we started this digital arts program. And so we had to recurriculate, but part of being from South Africa and with our historical past, with recurriculating and creating a new curriculum as well, we are very much part of this idea of decolonizing a curriculum. So in writing our new curriculum, this has been at the fore of much of what we do, whether it comes to using our technology, but mostly in terms of how we approach our subject matter in digital arts. So for me, it's been a long more 15-year journey of having to look at a new curriculum, having to also build a lab and deal with students as well who are actually digitally very proficient and very innovative, but who come to the digital world in a different way to the global north, in a sense. As I mentioned in my panel presentation, many of our students, their introduction to the digital revolution is via a smartphone. It's how they survive in the world. And interestingly, so what happens is we get very innovative students coming to us who have learned to be proactive in the way they use digital technology. So that is something that something that I never considered when I was looking at recurriculating. We were we had funding. We wanted to get a first class lab together, which we did. But in curriculating and in teaching, what we've realized is that when students leave our lab, that while they might have used and accessed cutting edge technology, they leave with just their smartphone. And so we have started, and I mentioned it started through in COVID, where students were sent home to rural areas. And we suddenly realized we're having to teach this digital curriculum, and our students have they have no laptops, not even, a few of them even had smartphones. So what we did was we managed to buy them smartphones, and we translated the curriculum to smartphone technology. And that worked so well for blended learning that since then we've now integrated into part of our curriculum. We realized in teaching that curriculum during COVID that you could actually teach very sophisticated skills and all manner of creative productions through this lo-fi technology. And so we've integrated it as part of our curriculum. And this is where Bhavna and Amu have come in. Amu was originally a student, doing these projects, and now he is a senior tutor. We've introduced them as part of our theory component, where they do a practice-based smartphone project, and we make sure that it is not at all lab-based. Everything has to be done via the smartphone, and I think that's what I'll leave them to talk about what they've been involved in terms of this, and both of them have added their own their own takes on it, coming from students who have used this kind of technology. So perhaps I'll start with Amu, who started assisting us with a stop motion project some years ago, but also was one of the students who produced the paper cutout animations that you saw, the roasted roots of marriage that I saw. Yeah, so I'll leave it up to you, Amu.
Yeah, for me with that project, it's quite rooted in our culture as is, because even now I think the whole point of the story was about like a girl that came through that was going to get married to the king of Eswatini. And then the mom told her that she might not get the king because the king favors another girl, which is quite similar to what just happened now with the Eswatini king, who just married the 21-year-old daughter of Jacob Zuma, who is a famous political figure. So it's something that still is happening in our culture. So I wanted to do something that's very not part of the African culture. And so that story, when we got that project, and then we had to just use a phone entirely through to making that project with paper cutouts. And for me, that was the first time I was being introduced to that. So that was kind of interesting. And then, you could work at home. You didn't need to be here around all the equipment. And so that was very, very nice to see that part of art that you can work. You don't need to be around the high tech and everything. And then you can just work off your phone, because devices, almost everyone has a device and it's quite easy to get access to one. You can borrow one, whereas getting a laptop or high-end tech, that could be a bit more difficult. So so the story was very interesting for us to do.
Yeah, I've seen it. I really enjoyed the story, the way you've implemented this use of the iPhone and the paper cutout. I think it's quite touching, quite beautiful. What are sort of your thoughts in terms of this about primitivism in this context? It's one thing that I'm thinking about. And primitivism as something and exoticism and avoiding exoticism, particularly when we think about portraying local African stories.
I think naturally I've seen it with my peers as well, when we all came in, everyone sort of wants to go through this like anime type of style and everything. So to do something that's quite primitive, even the surrounding areas of how I did it, it was like there's a fire, it's like two people sitting in a fire, it's outside, it's at night, there's not that much. So it's almost like in a primitive state of without tech and everything going on around, and to do something that isn't an influence of what everyone else is doing in the world, that's just sort of got that African feel, So I thought that was kind of interesting, because me, myself as well, like coming in, it was all about getting all the things we grew up sort of watching on TV. And then so now starting to look back at a story, because we had to edit that story to make something more African. And, that has, and we've also been getting taught this coming up as well, because I also remember that we shouldn't like sort of be heavily influenced and just looking straight at making things that are like European influence and everything, try to look within.
So if I can come in then, what was interesting, and I remember from this, Ami might remember, but the class was very resistant to doing this project. They gave me some uphill because it was so rough and ready. And I think the project they all got so immersed in the most. And Amu actually said to me a few weeks ago, we should do that project again. And I was laughing because they were so resistant to it. But I think the important thing as well, what they learned about then, is something that we do try to teach them. It's not only about being African, but also just investigating their own voice and their own surroundings and seeing that as important as anywhere else, So it's not shutting down their Western influences, which is what they all come from and what they love. And I think that has had a lasting impact on their work from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think absolutely that makes a lot of sense. I guess there's also this idea that we are so attached to our smartphones. I think it's important to say also it's not something uniquely African. If I don't have my iPhone with me, I feel completely lost.
Exactly.
Geographically, existentially.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Bhavna, could you maybe add a little bit about how you have used this in your work?
For me, I think when we really got used to the idea of trying to use what was available to us was during COVID. I mean, we went from working in the lab to have so much of equipment available to us to being at home. So I think also for us, when that change happened and we realized that there are so many things that we were still able to do, we didn't necessarily need a MacBook or a drawing tablet. We could use what we had available to us. So I think that in itself also removed a lot of expectations that we had, where we looked more at what we wanted to do with what was given to us, rather than looking at something and thinking, oh, this is what was done and I need to somehow keep up to that standard. So I feel in a way, like we created our own standards. Like even when tutoring this module is, we teach them what the concept is and then how they interpret that. It's so unique to the students themselves. Like some of them will use like objects they find at home, and like it's such a true reflection of who they are. And like without, how Michelle is saying, like how Western ideals, like if we take all of that away and we just say, this is what we're trying to teach you, this is what this concept is about, it really allows them to look more at what they like to do and what is in their immediate surroundings and things like that. So I think also taking us out of like social media and what's already there allows us to like find our own place in a way.
Yeah.
It's like we trying to set our own standards now.
With this project, so this is this is another project, so it's a permanent project that we now have, where Bhavna and Amu, what they do is they run a project with our second year class where it has to be a smartphone project. And what Bhavna did and Amu have done is that they've been quite innovative in getting, maybe Bhavna can explain.
So it's like more of the technical aspects. So we try to show them and teach them, like, you know what, this is how it's done technically. So even for the stop motion, like we take like the old boxes that we find in the lab and like we create stands out of it. So it's also teaching them like with stop motion, these are things that are important and these are things that we need to pay attention to. And then they use the things we teach them and they create such beautiful things, but you can tell that they understand what it means and like theory behind it. Like we don't need to overcomplicate it sometimes. Like just showing them what a phone stand is and that if you place your phone here and take pictures, this is as simple as it can be. But what you're producing is actually quite intricate and there's a lot of theory behind it. It's just that teaching them and relating it to them, we have to find new ways that they are familiar with as well. Like keeping the phone still, how to use the phone. Like we're all very familiar with our phones and taking pictures and going on the app store and downloading a free app, editing pictures. So we try and focus on those things because we know that it's sort of drawing on things that they already know and it's already in the immediate environment.
This is actually quite interesting. I was reminding, I'm from Denmark originally, and I don't know if you've heard of this the Dogme movies. Lars von Trier did a few of them, and what essentially they did was that they put certain limitations on the technical aspects of filming in order to let their creativity loose a little bit more and focus on the storytelling, right? And I think as in art, right, there is an aspect of this in what you're doing that sort of when you force yourself into another frame, right, or give yourself certain limitations, you can sort of find another way out, something new.
So we try to tell them that, you know what, there's an idea of how things are done, but specific to us, it might not be the same. I mean, depending on like how we are here, the students that we get, it always changes. It's always us trying to respond to what we are presented with and the students that come to us and their background. So it's always changing, I think, the limitations that we put on ourselves as well. Like we always have to sort of reflect what's happening with our students as well.
Yeah, but I guess my argument is, or my question is that if limitations can be a productive thing in art.
Yeah, I think so. Because with us, with our story, it's like you know, we aren't given a free range. Like it's going to be limited. You got to tell an interesting story, maybe within like a minute, and then so within that minute, so you sort of have to be very creative of how you create a beginning, and a middle, and an end, and then try to be interesting all at once and tell like a very short story. So those limitations can be an asset, and they allow us to also see that you don't need to have this lengthy time frame to create something interesting.
Yeah, and also with the paper cutout medium, I mean, to work with the paper cutout medium is quite difficult because it's a different type of movement and you are restricted because, you know, first of all with them, and you probably saw that with Amu's movie, it's a profile art. So they couldn't have anything facing front. They had to do everything profile and they had to take that into consideration as well. And then the movement too, you know, to create those puppets. The puppets are interesting, but they create a limited movement. So they had to find ways of making the movement work in its own limited way, and that was almost the charm of the films in the end. That itself is a very limiting process, but it forced them, as you were saying, it forced them to re-look at things in a new way, and it opened up other possibilities of, being creative. But just also on the note of those African storytelling, in our institution and just in generally in South Africa, there's a huge drive towards preserving cultural heritage. That's one of the things about digital technology, and especially in our university, is finding ways of digitally preserving cultural heritage, and those oral traditions and storytelling traditions, that is very much part of the ethos of this university as well. So those remain a very valuable archive.
Yeah, I think that's particularly interesting, obviously, in the context such as that of South Africa. What are the more political rather than just artistic and cultural aspects of this? Because, of course, I mean, while there's been as I understand it, and I'm not an expert certainly on South Africa, but there's been a political decolonization, but South Africa is still like a very socioeconomically unequal country, right? Along the same lines as apartheid, really.
Yes. That's a complex one, and also this idea of decolonization. It means different things for different people, and the problem with it, not in our university, but it can become part of a problematic nationalism, that shuts down knowledge, but it was with our university, what is interesting is that it's come full circle in that decolonization is now seen as synonymous with internationalization, which means those things do come in, and they're having to be renegotiated in terms of not shutting down. The problem with that kind of nationalism is it shuts out students from the rest of the world. And I think what our institution, what they've realized is that there needs to be, some flexibility in terms of remaining globally competitive and internationally relevant. And I think this is a new ethos. But yes, politically, I find it personally a very problematic term in the way it has been used, rather than, but at the same time as how we use it, I feel it has been a very positive force. I've been on a number of conferences where we look at things like creative practice and decolonization, and it is, what I'm amazed is how, just to reiterate, it means different things for different people. People who want to politicize it will, and then it becomes a very toxic thing. So it is it's a complex term.
If we think about the politicization of decolonization, which I guess it can be a good thing and a bad thing in certain ways. One of the things that's been perhaps somewhat controversial has been sort of the taking out the Western canon, particularly from curricula around the world. And you take, as I understand it, an approach of not so much removing a Western canon, but rather reorienting it. So I was wondering if that's something that you could comment on.
Yes, I mean, that's something we have to constantly, and we need to do it more and more. That particularly comes into our theory as well, where, I come out of art history, and I'm sure you probably do as well. And what I was taught in South African schools during apartheid was a very Eurocentric version of art history. And where I was taught about African art, it was very skewed in many ways. In terms of reorientating it, I've been very lucky in the fact that we've been able to decide how this curriculum for our digital arts program works. So I was someone who came from art history to having to teach rather contemporary art theory. And so there is still a strong focus on Western art practice, because especially with digital arts, because that is where a lot of the innovations are happening. But we equally, for example, what we have introduced in the first year component is now history of African animation, for example. But so many of these things are interlinked. So if you're teaching primitivism, there are famous African artists who moved to France sort of in the 1940s who were seen as who adopted primitivism. So we try, when I teach, I can't speak for the university, but when I teach and when I look at curricula, it is rather finding synergies between, and so in that way, it's not just where the history. When I was taught in fine arts, it was the history of Western art. That's what it was called. Now we just call it art theory or digital art theory. So it's a case of, yes, as you say, reorienting, but also teaching things that are relevant to students as well. A lot of their cultural references are both Western and African. So it's recognizing that and learning how to find those synergies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, of course. And I guess South Africa in that case is also a specific case. Do you see some of the stories that you're telling, Amu and Bhavna, are they more South African or more generally African? I wonder where you sort of stand on that in terms also of in terms of nationalism.
I think for me, particularly the story that we told is quite more local because, like I just said, like recently we had the former president's daughter marrying the king of Eswatini, which is quite similar, I think she's going to become like her 16th wife or something. And then with my story, it's also quite similar, whereby the daughter wanted to be an additional wife of the king of Eswatini as well. So it's still something that's going on. So it's quite very local.
You straddle kind of two societies in a way, because I often will say to me, Michelle, I'm going home because I've got a cultural event, So, but then he comes back here and it's a different world.
Yeah, so I have to be mindful of both sides. And I think part of having that and then also being exposed to the technology is also quite an influence. So it's also sort of doing something that's a part of who I am and how I grew up. And then also growing up in the world with the tech and everything and getting introduced to all the softwares and how to do the animation and all the influences. So it's sort of combining the two.
And how do you both, I wonder, both as a tutor and with your students and in your own life, how do you navigate that, I guess, those two worlds?
Yeah, like being a student myself is quite comforting when you realize that there is that like factor of support where you can sort of bring in things that influence your background, because most of the students are also coming from a similar background as I did. So being able to help them out with like that and just seeing that I myself as well come from that part of the world and that I can help them out. So I think it's quite comforting. And when we got that story as well, like how Michelle had said, that we sort of were resisting it at first because we just sort of, in a way, sort of been programmed to think anime and all the action scenes and all the Asian and Western based influences. So now seeing that you come to the school and then you get an opportunity to do something that's more grounded and more relevant to you, that's actually it becomes exciting at the end when you do it and you end up being happy about it.
Yeah, okay, that's amazing. I'm still wondering, I found it, this sort of reticence to engage with that, where does that come from, I wonder?
Yeah, I mean, I think the unwillingness comes from, we all grow up with TVs around, watching Dragon Ball, watching all the other action scenes. So we just thought that, we want to make these cool, action-packed and like these colorful and all of these things. And then, as you can see with the paper cutout animation for the kind that we did was also like quite dim and like sort of dark in a way. And it was just like such minimal colors and everything. So it's almost like you're taking like growing up, so many years of growing up and getting influenced, and then you're just sort of like changing it instantly. So obviously there's going to be that form of resistance. And then once we're engaged in it, you realize, oh, wow, this is actually quite interesting. And you can work on it like even without this technology, without all these things. So I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Particularly, so having been exposed to this Western and Asian culture for many years, that's a sometimes, I guess, a very strong influence.
But also, I have found that students there's not a shame to it, but almost like they're wanting to break away from that background, but seeing that there's a value to it and a preciousness and something that's really unique to the rest of the world. That was my main thing with them is showing that what you're doing, no one has ever done. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. The way you've done it, the story you've done. Whereas if you're going to do an anime, something that looks like yet another anime short or another Disney sort of inspired thing, it doesn't have its own, its own aura in a sense. And I think that was also important about that project.
I think, and this discovering or rediscovering perhaps, one's identity as something to some degree unique I think, is also a part, certainly, of decolonization. Amu, you talked about your background. Would you just be a little bit more specific? So what it really is, that background?
I grew up in a Zulu home. So for us, we still do like these traditional things, like slaughtering of cows. We still have kings. We still have all those kind of things, and they still have that kind of influence and factor. So, and then when you go home, it's you got the technology, you got the TVs around, and then from time to time, you still got to go and do the ceremonies and stuff. Like I had to do quite a few actually. Now I resist against it now that I'm a bit older. But back then, my mom would be like, "No, gotta do this." And you're surrounded by family and everything, so you sort of get influenced by that, and you see it growing up, and they don't take negotiation for something that's up for debate. You just get told, and if you try to resist, it's like everyone just changes up on you. And then growing up, you realize the value of that, and keeping your culture and tradition alive. And then you also still move to this side of things where you can sort of get involved and get influenced by other mediums and factors.
And can I ask, how has your family and your community received what you're doing?
They're quite happy and quite interested sometimes. But I think for them, it's still something that's just not in their, how can I call it, like spectrum. Like they like, if you show it to them and then explain it to them, but they're not gonna like come out themselves, like sort of like seeking to, you sort of have to make that initiative, because it's still something that isn't quite common, especially in the rurals and some parts of the township as well. So you sort of have to be the one who has to be like, hey, look, I've done this and this is how I did it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Bhavna, do you want to jump in maybe and talk a little bit about if you have a different experiences or how your background sort of fit in?
The whole idea of identity for me personally is very, very important. I think also being part of like a diaspora from India in South Africa, we're always presented with these different types of inspiration, like the different cultures and media and all of these things that we're presented with. And then the thing is, when we try to tell our own stories, we look for things that represent what we feel in our own unique way. Like for me personally, like to see maybe another South African Indian artist in creating work and in digital media, I guess it would give a sense of belonging as well, because we know that our stories are unique. And then to hear someone else say it, but share some of the ideas about it, it gives us a sense of belonging. So I feel like when we create things that are reflective of who we are here, there are a lot of people who recognize that and who relate to it. And I think that gives them the chance to create from their own as well. Like for me, like if I were to do something, like I was also in fine art, and then I spoke about my history with indentured laborers and things. And then because I use things that are very significant to me as a South African and an Indian, there are other people in the lab or in the CVA who sort of related to that. And then it does give you a sense of belonging that, this is where I am. These are the same stories that I am telling, or these people have the same experiences as me. So I think that's where it's important, where this digital technology now is broadening our net, where if I were to post something or if I were to create something and I wanted to share it, it's accessing a lot more people than me going and telling someone this is what I've created. So I think the technology is also a very good vehicle for us to get our stories out, our unique stories. And then I think also it encourages other people as well, other people who share it, to say, okay, it's not just about Western ideals. Okay, I may not fit in to Indian ideals. I'm sort of in between. And there are other people who share that space. And I think it's very encouraging with digital technology that it's allowing us to do that in such a very prominent way, where when you do something, it's very easy to find someone who shares the same ideas and things as you. And I feel like technology is really a vehicle for that. Yeah. It's like breaking down those boundaries, and it's like you may not share all of what I have in my life, but there are aspects that you can pull out. And I think that's a good thing to if you can relate to something, it kind of encourages you to be like, okay, then maybe there's a story that I can tell about myself and someone else will relate to it and that will inspire someone else. So I feel like, yeah, being kind of in the middle with my identity, it's like, it's good to find others in that same space.
Can I also just mention, I don't know, Bhavna won't mention it, but she's just spent a year in Antwerp affiliated to the Royal College of Arts on a scholarship. It's a project where we are assisting with them developing an animation and drawing software. And Bhavna did some very interesting things where she included, your mandalas and she, she did some maybe that she can maybe talk to. I don't know if you're interested in hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the project itself was a digital software that connected users via the internet. So if Amu and Michelle, for example, were using the software here and I was in Belgium using it, we are kind of drawing on the same canvas in a way, the same app, the same software. So it's kind of like us co-creating something. And then with the software, I brought in some of my own personal experiences where for us, the art that we do and what I grew up around, I incorporated into that. And then it was sort of like what we brought and what they brought coming together. And then it was a really good representation of what it can be possible when people are allowed to tell their stories in that way. Like Belgium and South Africa, it's very different cultures and people, and then even the way we grew up. But some things, I think when we bring it together, we can see that there's some similarities that can actually help us.
What's the name of that software? Is it public and is it something that people can use?
It's open source, so it's available to everyone. I think the whole concept of the software is it's meant to kind of connect people. So that's why it's open to everyone. If you're welcome to use it. It's on, I think, I can't remember, like Open Lab or something.
Okay, but we can send a link.
Yeah, I can send you the link.
Amu's also been involved on the South African side. He's been the partner on the South African side, co-creating, organizing the projects as well.
And I feel it was really great because when we started with the software, it was the devices connected to the Wi-Fi or local modem. And then that's how they connect. And then we kind of developed it further where Belgium could connect to South Africa over the internet. And then that opens up a whole range of possibilities where it wasn't just two countries. It could be like multiple countries, all on one server, all giving input and like us responding to what they're doing. So it's kind of like coming together in a way.
Yes, and in fact, what we're doing is there's going to be, I'm about to go to Antwerp again because that's exactly what Bhavna's saying. So we're going to be meeting with partners from Poland and the USA and Belgium and South Africa to set this up kind of as part of a drawing marathon in February.
Oh wow! Okay, that's Please share that with us.
I'll keep you posted. Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Okay. Very much looking forward to hearing more about that. I was wondering just before we end, if you sort of have any, you guys are all teachers and tutors, if you have any sort of advice for teachers who want to include this in their teaching, some of your ideas generally.
I think that the main thing, and I'll also hand over to Bhavna and Amu, is I think what we took away with it, it's not about the technology, and I think it's basically about what Bhavna was also saying, is that if you simplify things, it becomes about the skills. So this idea of using lo-fi technology is for us has been a kind of eye-opener in a way, in that it refocuses one. So somebody coming into it, I think it's a case of almost sort of dumbing down is a terrible word, but seeing that as in a positive light, but also at the same time, look what my attitude has changed towards smartphone technology in terms of the fact that, and that it can be an empowering and democratizing platform. And I think once you realize that and you start investigating it, you can pretty much do it on your own.
I was just wondering also if you think there's any way that, global corporations can sort of support this, right? Because in a way, I mean, at the same time as using this technology to to decolonize is great and clearly very, very useful. It's also at the end we're depending in some way or another, right, on global corporations for the software and
yes,
the
exactly. Yeah.
And the hardware. Yeah, that's both a problem, I guess. Yeah, I guess that's a problem. I don't know if you want to comment on that. If you can comment on that,
these guys might have more to say than me.
Yeah, I mean, we need the big guys to come in, because obviously, you know, with the softwares that are there, even those that are free, they are made by quite well established and set up companies. So even though it's easier to take pictures and everything, you sort of, there's still that element where you still need a form of software to sort of bind the project together. So you still need an application or some form of binding thing for your animation. So yeah, I think the support part is
you're right. Yeah, and it seems to be closing down. I mean, we're undergoing a huge pressure now because of the restrictions that Adobe Creative Suite, for example, are placing on us, where we used to be able to buy a CD. You know, now we locked into these very costly annual subscriptions. And even with our other major software that we use, Toon Boom and Dragon Stop Motion, they've been bought out now. And where they used to be, you could buy just a sort of a permanent license. You know, it's cruel and ruthless, you know, but I think what is happening is that there are, especially with Adobe, there's a kind of revolution against Adobe, I think, at the moment, and this idea of finding more and more there's free, like for example, free software like for Photoshop and the major things, and hopefully that's a trend that's going to continue. And 3D animation software as well is free. So, you know, you can get pretty industry standard stuff. So, yeah, on the one hand, there's a cracking down, but on the other, there's this kind of slightly rebellious background. Yeah, the Belgian project is part of that ethos.
Brilliant. Yeah. So, on a closing note, please keep us updated on that.
We will. We will.
Very much for that. Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, I just want to say thank you so much for participating.